All right. Hello, everyone. I'm going to start out with a little story. So, I live with my Chinese mother-in-law. I call her my po-po. And she isn't familiar with Western culture. She doesn't speak English. She's never been outside of China. And so living with her leads to a lot of interesting and sometimes unusual or surprising situations. And one such situation happened recently during Christmas Eve. So as an American, I have lots of fun memories about Christmas Eve where we're supposed to leave cookies and milk out for Santa. And we're supposed to leave a carrot out for Santa's reindeer. We go to bed, and then Santa comes, he gives us presents, and he eats the cookies and milk, and his reindeer eat the carrot. I tell my son, okay, this is going to be fun. We put the stuff on the table. I take my son in to get ready for bed. We come out 5 minutes later. The table is empty. The stuff is gone. Where did it go? It's too early for Santa to come. It didn't take long to discover the culprit, and that was my pawpaw. She loves to clean. She saw this stuff, she said, leftover food, and she threw it away. Now, I would never throw this away. And why not? Because when I see this kind of stuff, all of a sudden, all sorts of echoes of happy memories and experiences that I had when I was a little girl celebrating Christmas with my family pop into my mind, right? There's a lot of meaning associated with this for me. But when my pawpaw sees the same thing, it means nothing to her. She draws a blank, and she throws it away. Now, this question of how different people see different things differently is very interesting to me, and it's not just about some people seeing meaning where other people draw a blank. It's also about two different people looking at the same thing and seeing different things. And so, for example, if I see bats, I say, ooh, scary, Halloween, haunted houses. My pawpaw sees some bats, maybe she's going to think, oh, auspicious, lucky symbol, right? If I see a dragon, I'm going to think, ooh, scary, medieval knights, damsels in distress. My pawpaw sees a dragon, she's going to think, oh, Chinese New Year. Or maybe she's going to think about her son who was born in the year of the dragon. So, I got a lot of chances to think about this sort of way that different people see things differently while I was teaching theory of knowledge. This is IB TOK class last year. And this is a class where we think about how we know what we know. And so we had this question, and it is our most revered knowledge more fragile than we assume it to be? And we had to talk about this in the context of art and literature. And I happen to have studied literature in college. I love to read, so I had a lot of fun discussing this question with students, right? And I quickly realized that what I think about this question is very different from what students think. Now, our means it's a collective thing, and revered knowledge means we have emotional connections. It's very meaningful to us. So my sense of what my most revered or our most revered knowledge means to me is very different from what that means to students who grew up in China. And that's normal, that's fine, right? I have a strong sense of this, and so do some of my students. But other students don't seem to have a very strong sense of what our most revered knowledge might mean, right? And it's hard to start questioning and thinking about the source of your knowledge, the meaning of your knowledge, if you don't really know what that knowledge is. So this got me thinking, where does my sense of what revered knowledge means come from, right? And so there's a little bit of a clue inside TOK, which talks about how knowledge and truth in the AOK, or in art and literature, come from our own emotional responses to works of art and literature, right? So why is it that I, who love to read, have strong emotional responses to works of literature? Well, one is it's a good plot, or maybe I'm familiar with cultural symbols that the author is using. But another reason is because I recognize literary allusions that the authors are using. And these are basically echoes of past works and ideas. that people who have grown up with a certain cultural background sort of recognize and resonate with when they see them. So for example, if an author wants to use an allusion to Plato's allegory of the cave, right, I'm immediately going to have all sorts of resonations and echoes in my mind relating to truth and reality. Same thing, if I see an allusion to Frankenstein, right, I'm going to think about questions about scientific ethics, or an allusion to George Orwell's 1984 might make me have all sorts of associations surrounding ideas about surveillance, political control, right, and individual freedom. So why is it that authors can successfully use these kinds of allusions and expect their readers to resonate with them and understand them? Well, it's because they can expect that most people are familiar with works that are part of what we call the canon. And these are basically just a collection of classical works of literature that have stood the test of time and are influential, right? And so they can assume that people know what these things are and have associations associated with them. So if we look at schools in the US, lots and lots of universities, they offer a liberal arts curriculum. And reading the classics, reading classic works of literature is actually considered the cornerstone, for a long time was considered the cornerstone of a liberal arts education. So we can see an example of this, Columbia University and what they call the core curriculum. As part of the core curriculum, they ask students to read works of classic literature, and they say the reason they do this is because they want to create a shared intellectual experience for students. They want students to be able to explore stories and ideas, right, through which we make ourselves intelligible to one another. That means they want students to create a certain sense of like shared intellectual identity and a shared intellectual language that they can use to communicate. So this seems like a good idea, but actually in the US it's very controversial. A lot of people have said we should question this idea of having everyone read the classics. We should question this idea of having there be a canon of classic works. So in the 1960s, people said, why are we privileging works of literature by dead white men, right? We need more diversity. We need more minority and women's voices. So they actually moved away from requiring the canon. Then we got people saying, we're getting too diverse. We should go back to reading the classics. And they actually even created a test based on having students read classic works called the CLT, which is growing in popularity and has ambitions to replace the SAT. So this is actually getting so popular, it's been in the news a lot recently. It's become part of what we call the culture wars, where you have conservatives saying, yes, we need to return to our collective sense of intellectual identity, and you have liberals saying, no, 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 we shouldn't read classic works, or we should rethink the classic works, they need to be more diverse, right? So there's a lot of these questions going back and forth about what students should read. But I think the question is, these kinds of questions are sort of becoming irrelevant because they're being fast replaced by more pressing questions, more pressing existential questions about whether or not students are actually reading anything at all. So if we talk about the age of AI, we've got students who are overusing AI. We've got students who don't seem to read anything except AI-written summaries. We got students who don't really write anything except AI question prompts, right? And at the same time, we've got parents and students moving away from reading the classics and studying the liberal arts and moving towards what they perceive as more practical STEM majors. So maybe there's something to these trends. Maybe reading the classics, maybe studying the liberal arts is an outdated, old-fashioned practice. Maybe we should just throw it away, like we threw away having everyone read Latin and Greek in the past. Perhaps, but there's actually dissenting voices coming from an interesting place, and that is the AI executives themselves. So recently, the Wall Street Journal interviewed some AI executives, and they said, what's your advice to your own children about what they should study in the future? And these guys said, several of them said, the liberal arts. Because studying the liberal arts and the basis of that is reading the classics, can create and help people develop skills that are irreplaceable, like empathy, like communication, right? But if we really want to develop these skills, we have to return to thinking about the importance of serious reading, serious writing, serious thinking. And if we don't do these things, we risk more than just losing out on the ability to develop these sort of irreplaceable, important skills. We're also losing out on the ability to develop a collective sense of intellectual identity and a shared intellectual language. And even worse, we're risking the potential to create a generation of students who draw a blank when faced with the collective intellectual heritage of humankind. And that seems like an outcome that we should all try to avoid. That's my little talk. Thank you for listening.